July 1945, above the inland sea, the night tasted of salt and burned oil as a Mitsubishi Ki-45 Toryu climbed through ragged cloud, its twin Nakajima engines drumming against the darkness. Below, searchlights from Kobe and Kure felt along the underside of the sky like pale fingers, then recoiled as cloud swallowed their beams. The crew, pilot and observer, hunched over a Type 98 reflector sight and a tangle of headphones, had been warned of black aircraft prowling the routes of the B-29s, machines said to kill without being seen. They scanned by instinct, not faith. No exhaust glow. No silhouette. Only the sudden red stitching of tracers crossing the void from nowhere and a white flower of flame as their wingman vanished. The radio crackled once, then filled with the hiss of the universe. Reports in the Home Defense Command that week spoke of foes painted the color of night, with sets that could pierce cloud and moonless air. Some pilots swore the attackers were silent. Others insisted they heard a low thunder just before the strike. What most now believed felt worse than rumor. Radar, foreign, invisible, was giving the enemy eyes. The Toryu's heavy guns, even its 37mm nose cannon, meant little if the first warning of contact was impact. Ki-45s, J1N1 Geckos, and hastily modified interceptors clawed at coordinates fed by ground observers, but the black hunters were already inside the dark. Guided by instruments the Japanese crews could not read, sweeping in from a beam, firing, and dissolving back into cloud. By dawn, the inland sea lay flat and glassy, and the surviving crews wrote brief, embarrassed entries. Engaged, enemy unseen. The Empire's last refuge, night, had been taken from it, one radar pulse at a time. To understand how those unseen hunters learned to see in darkness, we turned to the beams, the boxes, and the men who trusted them. Summer 1943, above the Western Pacific. Darkness was both shield and terror for Japan's pilots. For 2 years, the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy Air Forces had ruled the skies through daylight mastery, sun at their backs, precision in their eyes, and courage as their compass. But when night fell, all that dominance collapsed into helplessness. Their empire had built its wings on visibility. Spotters with binoculars, coastal observers with notebooks, and great concrete ears of acoustic locators guarded the home islands. These giant trumpet-shaped devices, once symbols of vigilance, could do nothing against bombers flying higher than 25,000 feet. When engines droned faintly above the clouds, there was no direction. No distance, only confusion. In the Solomons and the Carolines, U.S. bombers struck Rabaul and Truk under dim skies, radar guiding their approach while Japanese fighters waited on dark runways, unable to find the enemy. Searchlights clawed empty air. Fuel was wasted in futile patrols. Even the most skilled aces, men like Isamu Kashidi and Yasuhiko Kuroe, who could read a dogfight like a book, were blind when the sun set. Japan's aviation doctrine, designed around visual contact and aggressive maneuver, could not adapt to combat where the eye was useless. The Empire's aircraft industry, advanced in metallurgy and engine design, lagged years behind in electronic warfare. Its engineers saw radar as naval equipment, not an aviator's tool. Psychologically, the darkness bred dread. Pilots who had once laughed at the clumsy technological luck of British and American night fighters now whispered that the Allies fought with invisible powers. The idea that machines could see through cloud and night felt like sorcery. By 1944, as B-29 superfortresses roared from Saipan and Guam toward the home islands, Japan's blindness became fatal. Every unchallenged night raid burned factories, fuel depots, and hope. The empire that had conquered half the Pacific by daylight now groped for defense in darkness, desperate to match instinct with invention, and to learn how to fight a war it could no longer see. Autumn 1941. The night over southern England shimmered with cold moisture and fear. German bombers droned above the clouds, confident that darkness was their ally. But deep within the murk, something unseen was hunting them. The Bristol Beaufighter, armed with 20mm Hispano cannons and fitted with the revolutionary AI Mk4 radar, had become Britain's silent defender. Its radar dish, no larger than a dinner plate, sent pulses that bounced off enemy metal and returned as faint signals on a cathode ray tube. For the first time in aviation history, pilots could see through darkness. Guided by calm voices from ground controllers and their radar operators, they closed the gap unseen, firing bursts that shattered He-111s and Ju-88s before the Germans even knew they were found. The Blitz had birthed a new predator, the night fighter. The United States studied this British breakthrough closely. By 1943, the Americans fielded the P-70 Havoc, an interim solution that paved the way for something far more ambitious: the Northrop P-61 Black Widow. It was the first combat aircraft in the world designed entirely for nocturnal warfare. With a wingspan of 66 feet, twin Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines, and a radar set, the SCR-720, that could detect an enemy 5 miles ahead, the P-61 turned night into a battlefield of echoes. Its 3-man crew, pilot, radar operator, and gunner, functioned as a single organism. The operator tracked blips. The pilot adjusted course. The gunner aimed 4 50-caliber machine guns and 4 20mm cannons in a dorsal turret. Precision replaced chance. When the first P-61s reached Saipan in June 1944, Japan's nocturnal safety vanished. Unlike the Imperial interceptors that relied on moonlight and luck, the Black Widow stalked by signal and mathematics. On one humid night over Iwo Jima, a Japanese G-4M Betty bomber simply ceased to exist. Its pilot never saw the shadow that killed him. Intelligence officers in Tokyo called the new enemy Kuroi-shi, the Black Death. From that moment, Japan understood that darkness was no longer a refuge. It had become a weapon, wielded by an enemy that could see without light. The race to create Japan's own eyes in the dark had begun. Winter, 1943. Near Tachikawa Airfield west of Tokyo, the night reeked of engine oil and cold iron. Beneath tarpaulin covers, engineers from Nakajima and Kawasaki worked by lantern light on aircraft never meant to fly in darkness. Orders from the Army's Technical Bureau demanded an answer to the Allies' invisible weapons. What emerged were desperate improvisations. The Ki-45 Toryu and Ki-46 Dyna reforged as night interceptors. Mechanics blackened exhaust ports, fitted crude flame dampeners, and bolted oblique 20mm cannons into the fuselage roofs, mimicking the German Schrägemusik design sent through the Luftwaffe liaison office in Singapore. The idea was simple: approach unseen from below, fire upward into a bomber's belly. In practice, the glare blinded the gunner and the recoil tore rivets loose. By March 1944, Japan received a handful of Fuji-202 Liechtenstein radar sets from Germany, precious cargo smuggled across Asia in disassembled crates. When technicians opened them, frustration followed. The valves and transformers required alloys Japan could no longer produce. The circuits demanded power supplies their aircraft couldn't support. Reverse engineering turned into guesswork. The Navy's own hope, the J1N1 Gecko Irving, carried a primitive Type 3 radar with a range of barely 1.5 miles, useful only when the target was already visible. Pilots relied on ground observers shouting bearings over static-filled radios and on searchlights that blinded friend and foe alike. Many interceptions ended in tragedy: mid-air collisions, mistaken attacks, or lonely spirals into the sea. For Japan's airmen, courage became a cruel substitute for technology. They could hear the deep throbs of American engines overhead, but strike at nothing. Each failure tightened the noose around the Empire's skies. Where Allied radar wove a seamless web, Japan's defense was stitched from noise and hope. The hunters of daylight had become the hunted in night's silence, and soon that silence would burn above Tokyo itself. July 1944, Saipan shimmered under a black tropical sky. The air hung thick with humidity and the faint smell of aviation fuel. Along the coral airstrip at Isley Field, engines rumbled in the dark as the first P-61 Black Widows of the 6th Night Fighter Squadron prepared for launch. The ground crews moved with dim flashlights taped blue, their faces streaked with sweat and dust. Then, one by one, the black twin-boom silhouettes rolled forward and vanished into the Pacific night. No formation lights. No chatter, only the deep pulse of twin R-2800 engines fading into silence. Their prey was already inbound. Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers from Truck, flying low and confident beneath broken cloud, high above. Captain Thomas R. Lambert watched his radar screen bloom with a faint echo, 5 miles ahead, closing fast. His radar operator guided him through the darkness, counting down in clipped phrases. At half a mile, Lambert eased the throttle, lifted the nose, and saw nothing but black. The operator whispered, "Range, 200 yards." Lambert fired. 4 20mm cannons stitched invisible death across the void. In seconds, the Betty erupted in orange flame, falling into the sea without a single enemy silhouette ever glimpsed. Japanese survivors would later describe unseen guns that spat fire from the air itself. In the following weeks, the Black Widows hunted relentlessly, 14 kills, no losses. The effect on Japanese morale was catastrophic. Pilots began refusing dusk missions, claiming radar made them powerless. Commanders at Yokosuka called the intruders ghost machines with devil's eyes. Even propaganda officers struggled to invent explanations. For the first time, technology, not bravery, defined supremacy in the night sky. As the Black Widows moved north toward Iwo Jima and the home islands, Japan's pilots faced a truth they could neither see nor fight. The age of the invisible hunter had arrived, and it was coming for Tokyo, March 9, 1945, Tokyo. The air was heavy with the smell of kerosene and ash even before dawn. At 12:08 a.m., the first wave of B-29 superfortresses from the 73rd Bomb Wing appeared over the city, their approach masked by wind and darkness. Each aircraft carried clusters of M69 incendiaries designed to ignite wood and paper, the bones of Tokyo itself. When the bombs fell, the night turned to daylight. Fire rolled through the eastern wards, leaping from house to house until 16 square miles of the capital were ablaze. From above, pilots saw rivers of flame twisting through the streets like molten veins. From below, Japanese airmen scrambled into chaos. Geckos and Ki-45 Toryu roared into the sky, their pilots half blinded by smoke. Their radars failed amid the static of burning air. Their radios drowned in panic. American formations flew at altitudes too high for interception, their radar jamming rendering Japan's detectors useless. Pilots climbed blindly, chasing the red reflections of flames rather than the bombers themselves. Some vanished into the clouds and never returned, caught in rising thermals or colliding with one another over the inferno. One Gecko crew later swore they saw fireflies moving inside the blaze. Unaware they were glimpsing B-29s using their own radar to coordinate escape paths through the smoke. By morning, Tokyo was gone, 100,000 dead, millions homeless, and Japan's air defense shattered in spirit as much as in structure. Desperation replaced doctrine. Trainers and obsolete bombers were hastily fitted with underwing searchlights and flares, mockeries of true radar interception. Fuel rationing and the bombing of electronics factories crippled every attempt at improvement. The empire had reached a point where courage could no longer compensate for science. As new waves of P-61 Black Widows swept over Honshu, the struggle for the night sky ceased to be a contest of war. It became a fight for survival above a dying empire. Summer 1945, the night over Honshu was no longer dark but hollow. For Japan's fighter pilots, the black sky that once promised stealth had become a silent trap. Men who had mastered daylight duels in China and the Philippines, aces like Major Teruhiko Kobayashi of the 244th Sentai, found themselves stripped of their greatest weapon, sight. Their training had taught them to read the shimmer of exhaust trails, the glint of sunlight on an enemy wing, the angle of a climb. But against radar-guided opponents, there were no silhouettes, no reflections, only the sound of engines somewhere in the dark, impossible to place. Flight logs from the 4th Sentai began to repeat the same haunting phrase: enemy noise without sighting. To fight the fear, command turned to spirit. Officers preached calm through Zen meditation, urging pilots to see through the mind. They were told that intuition could replace technology, that the heart of the warrior might pierce what machines concealed. Yet intuition faltered where radar triumphed. Pilots flew into blackness until fuel ran low, sometimes firing at shadows or moonlight. Many returned with empty guns and trembling hands. Others never returned at all. The sky became a place of isolation, not heroism. Each man alone inside a metal cocoon, listening for death. Across the Pacific, American crews operated in perfect tandem. The pilot flew by feel, the radar operator by pulse, the gunner by trust. Their coordination turned data into instinct and fear into precision. The contrast was devastating. While Japanese pilots fought ghosts, their enemies hunted by mathematics. As losses mounted and confidence collapsed, Tokyo's high command faced an unthinkable choice. Send men to die in blind suicide intercepts or surrender the night sky entirely. In the darkness above a burning nation, courage met its final limit. Spring 1945. Across the Pacific, war had become a contest of wavelengths and echoes. In the black skies over Okinawa, the hum of a radar dish was worth more than a squadron of eyes. Inside the P-61 Black Widow's narrow cockpit, the SCR-720 radar pulsed like a heartbeat, sweeping invisible circles through the night. Each wave painted the darkness in green ghosts, tiny blips marking altitude, distance, and bearing with machine precision. The operator called out headings in clipped tones, guiding the pilot as though reading constellations that only his screen could see. Within 2 minutes of contact, gunfire usually followed. The kill reports were clinical. Target acquired at 4.8 miles. Fired 3 bursts. Explosion observed. No visual confirmation necessary. Across the front, British Mosquito NF performed the same grim arithmetic. Their AI-MKX radar guided them through overcast skies to strike Heinkels and Bettys alike. The range, over 5 miles, made pursuit unnecessary. Interception became prediction. On the other side of the sea, Japan's answer, the Type 3 Mark VI, barely reached 2,000 yards on a clear night. The difference was not just range, but philosophy. Allied doctrine relied on GCI, ground-controlled intercept, linking every radar post from Iwo Jima to Okinawa into a web of surveillance. Controllers on the ground tracked formations, issuing real-time vectors to airborne fighters. Japan, starved of fuel and crippled by bombed electronics factories, could barely maintain a handful of operational radar sites. Desperate countermeasures followed. Flares dropped to confuse gunners. Erratic spiral climbs. Clouds of aluminum foil meant to scatter signals, but none could blind a technology that saw through weather. Smoke and deception alike. By mid-1945, science itself had turned predator. The empire that once boasted of divine vision now fought sightless. Its pilots groping through black air while Allied machines traced their deaths by pulse and light. The months ahead would reveal just how completely the unseen had conquered the sky. April-June 1945, Okinawa, the final crucible of night warfare. The island's black skies flickered with tracer arcs and burning fuel, a deadly theater where Japan gambled the last of its pilots. The 302nd and 321st Kokutai launched kamikaze sorties after sundown, believing the dark would hide them from radar and searchlights. Many took off with hand-painted suns on their wings, confident that invisibility meant salvation. But waiting in the void were radar-guided hunters, the F-6F-5N Hellcats and P-61 Black Widows. Their onboard radars, AN/APS-6 and SCR-720, could track a diving target before the human eye could glimpse a spark. On May 4th, Lieutenant Robert W. Mott climbed into the night with his Hellcat scope glowing lime green. Within minutes, he found a contact at 3 miles, then another. Before dawn, he had destroyed 3 raiders, each caught by the ghostly sweep of his radar. Throughout the campaign, American pilots logged more than 80 confirmed night kills, each engagement lasting mere seconds. Japanese aviators, stripped of functioning instruments, chased reflections of searchlights and the illusion of movement in smoke. Some attacked the beams themselves, mistaking them for aircraft. Others dove blindly, guided only by instinct. and died before realizing they were already being tracked. Survivors described stars turning to fire the moment radar-guided tracers met their dives with perfect timing. The illusion of safety and darkness evaporated. By Okinawa's end, Japan's air power had collapsed into fragments. Courage had met its technological limit. In post-battle briefings, Allied commanders called radar interception the key to saving the invasion fleet. Night, once a cloak for Japan's warriors, had become America's most ruthless ally, an executioner made of signal, silence, and science. Spring 1945, Tokyo's factories were dying one by one. At Tachikawa, where Japan once forged engines for empire, engineers now worked in the ruins of workshops with broken roofs and blackout curtains. Their task was impossible, to build radar-equipped interceptors in a nation without aluminum, copper, or power. The Ki-102C and J-1N1S Kokutai prototypes were assembled from scavenged parts, each aircraft a patchwork of desperation. When Allied bombers struck Tachikawa and Nagoya in successive raids that spring, the prototypes burned on their assembly lines. Their instruments melted to slag before they could ever fly. Aluminum, the lifeblood of modern aviation, had become so scarce that factories turned to wood, light but treacherous. The wooden airframes warped under humidity and reflected radar signals unpredictably, rendering the sets nearly useless. Vacuum tubes, essential for stable transmission, were rarer still. Technicians stripped civilian radios and even scavenged from downed Allied wrecks to salvage components. No two radars ever worked the same way. Some flickered erratically, others failed in the air. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Northrop's assembly lines produced a new P-61 every 10 hours, feeding an endless stream of flawless machines into the night war. Japan's engineers were not ignorant. They were out of time and material. Reports from the Army Aeronautical Technical Research Institute admitted the bitter truth. Their radar systems function only in perfect weather. The empire that had conquered by improvisation now stood at the edge of industrial collapse. Courage and ingenuity could not overcome the physics of frequency or the precision of mass production. As B-29s erased the last research centers, even the scientists began to understand that the age of heroism had ended. The new battlefield was invisible, and Japan no longer had the means or the morale to fight upon it. By the summer of 1945, Japan's airfields were filled not with defiance, but with silence. The men who had once sworn to die for the emperor now dreaded the sky above their own homeland. Each night, radar operators reported ghost echoes that flickered and vanished. Pilots spoke of pursuing phantom aircraft that turned out to be nothing at all. Others described explosions in the clouds with no visible attackers, as if the darkness itself had become weaponized. What had begun as rumor turned to mass fear. Flight commanders found it harder each week to form squadrons for night duty. The Black Hunters, as pilots called the P-61s, were said to strike without sound or warning, death from nowhere. The legendary samurai spirit, so carefully cultivated through years of training, crumbled in the face of invisible science. Spiritual instructors preached calm and resolve, yet even their words rang hollow. The night, once romanticized in Japanese poetry and wartime propaganda as the realm of stealth and purity, now embodied helplessness. The empire's best aces, men who had dueled over China and the Philippines, returned shaken, muttering that the enemy sees through the dark. In contrast, Allied pilots spoke almost reverently of their machines. They trusted the pulse of their radar more than their own eyes, describing the eerie confidence it brought, a feeling, as one veteran put it, of being omnipotent in the void. Intelligence officers reviewing Japan's final reports summarized it with brutal clarity. The enemy no longer fears our guns, only our blindness. Long before the atomic bomb fell, the psychological war had already been lost. Japan's airmen had surrendered the night, not through defeat in battle, but through the terror of what they could no longer see. When the guns finally fell silent in August 1945, the darkness itself had changed. The night battles fought over Japan and the Pacific had redefined what it meant to see in war. The P-61 Black Widow, once a shadow among stars, had proven that mastery of the invisible could decide battles before sight ever mattered. Its SCR-720 radar and coordinated crew doctrine became the blueprint for a new generation of interceptors. The F-82 Twin Mustang, the F-86 Saber's all-weather variants, and the early Cold War sentinels that watched the world's new frontiers by pulse and wavelength. What had begun as desperate innovation had become a science of total awareness, the dawn of electronic warfare. Japan's own engineers, many captured or later absorbed into Allied research efforts, carried forward the bitter lessons of defeat. Some joined post-war American and British radar development programs. Others helped rebuild Japan's civilian electronics industry from the ruins. The same minds that once struggled to match the SCR-720's range now designed navigation and weather tracking systems for peaceful skies. The understanding was universal. Control of the electromagnetic spectrum could outweigh numbers, valor, or even air superiority. The psychological war that once depended on bombs and propaganda had shifted to frequencies, interference, and silence. By the early 1950s, Japan's reborn laboratories at Toshiba, NEC, and Fujitsu were manufacturing radar not for fighters, but for commercial aircraft and coastal safety. The technology that once blinded the empire became its instrument of renewal. In this transformation lay the war's final irony. A nation defeated by unseen light became one of its greatest custodians. Yet the ghosts of those final flights, the men who chased echoes through black fire, remain in history's dark horizon, reminders that the future of warfare began the moment humanity learned to see without sight. In the end, the war that had begun in blinding daylight, with polished steel and the brilliance of maneuver, died in darkness, guided by invisible hands. Japan's pilots, heirs to a tradition of instinct and precision, found themselves undone not by superior numbers, but by unseen knowledge. The sky that had once been their domain became their undoing, a silent expanse filled with forces they could neither detect nor defy. Where courage once mattered most, mathematics and magnetism now ruled. The night itself, once their refuge, had turned traitor. For the Allies, victory in the dark proved that intellect could eclipse valor, that mastery of the unseen would define the wars of the future. The radar pulses that guided the Black Widows and Mosquitoes through cloud and chaos were the first heartbeats of modern warfare, their echoes stretching into every guided missile, every satellite, every drone that now watches from above the weather. The ghosts that haunted Japan's skies never left. They simply changed shape. When Japan's last pilots rose into that black horizon, they were not just fighting machines, they were witnessing humanity's passage into a new epoch, where the eye no longer ruled the battlefield. And when the silence finally settled over the burning cities, one truth lingered in the smoke. The age of sight had ended, and the age of signals had begun.